And it's not the baby's fault. It's not the adoptive mom's fault, but she's not the person that I grew inside for 9 months that I was familiar with. So I think she felt more than likely rejected from very early on because that was her only experience with a baby. She didn't have a biological child to be like, they really cling to their mom. She just had me who didn't cling to her because I was looking for somebody else.
Who am I?
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 This is Who Am I, Really? A podcast about adoptees that have located and connected with their biological family members. I'm Damon Davis, and today you're going to meet Brad. He called me from McKinney, Texas, just outside of Dallas. Growing up, Brad could tell something was off in his family, but he internalized his differences from his parents as his own inability to adapt to their personality traits and abilities. As an adult, DNA revealed that something far more foundational to his being was the reason for their differences, setting off a series of forced confrontations, unexpected sibling introductions, and coming face to face with an incarcerated man Brad had no intention of bonding with until he did. I implore you to stay until the end to hear how Brad's paternal reunion plays out. It is heartwarming for sure. This is Brad's journey. Brad was born in Dallas and stayed in the area his whole life. His dad was an airline pilot and his mother sold real estate. He had a middle-class upbringing where they traveled and did all kinds of things together, but the one thing they never discussed was adoption. Looking back, it seemed like there was no intention of ever talking about how their family was formed. Brad said he and his dad got along great, but he and his mother always had a strained relationship, but he never could figure out why. Brad was an only child, so there was no reference point for why he and his mother didn't get along. Brad is a late discovery adoptee. He found out he was adopted later in life, so when he reflects on his childhood now, he can see all of the ways he was different from his family.
Looking back, it's very clear now. Growing up, we couldn't have been more different. So my dad was big into sports growing up. He played baseball and football through high school, played for the Florida Gators in college, had some pro offers to play football, but eventually joined the Navy and went off to fly jets in Vietnam. So sports was really his thing. As long as I grew up, he was a runner. He was always doing something athletic on top of his job, and usually a handful of hands-on jobs outside of being a pilot because of their schedule. Like for the longest time, he built fences, he installed sprinkler systems. He did that just kind of to keep himself busy when he wasn't at work. My mom was very into, for lack of any other better word, being kind of a socialite. She liked all of the things that would go along with that. The parties, getting together with people, going to fancy places, and they were both super outgoing. If you flip that around, you get me, who is about as introverted as they come, probably almost pathologically introverted sometimes. I tried all the sports growing up. I played soccer in elementary school. I played football in junior high. I swam in high school. I played all kinds of sports. I sucked at all of them, and I hated every minute of doing them. But I thought that's what we did, so I just was like, eventually I'll find one that sticks with me, because obviously this is what we do as a family, so surely I'll find one of these at work. And the more I did it, the more it was never really my thing. I enjoy working out. I enjoyed running. I don't really run much anymore, but I enjoyed that kind of stuff. But team sports like baseball, football, like my dad did, I would want to do nothing less than that.
Mm-hmm. This is funny too, because it's one of the things that I always talk about with folks is sometimes it's the physical differences that you see. Sometimes it's your personality differences that you see, but also you will run into folks who have these kinds of differences in that one part of the family is very athletically inclined and the other part is not, or one part is very, very studious and into education and the other is not. It's just fascinating to see how we differ from each other.
Yeah, and even when you mention that, it makes me think when my dad was in college, he was going through pre-med. So, I mean, obviously gifted in studies. Once again, something that I won't say I wasn't gifted in it. I made my way through school, but I was certainly not a studious person. I did what I had to do to get through school, and that was about as much effort as I was ever interested in putting into it until I became an adult.
Mm-hmm. So what would you say you were gifted at? What was your strong suit?
What I enjoyed was reading. I liked art. I tended, except for the fact that my mom really liked me having friends around, to be a little bit of a loner. I like to read comic books. I like to read, kind of do my own thing. I was good at swimming as a sport. It just wasn't something that I enjoyed getting up and going to do every day like some people would do.
Yeah.
So, and then you asked physically differences. I'm probably a solid head taller than my father was. I'm 6'4". I think he was around 5'11".
Wow.
And mom was even shorter than that. I look absolutely nothing like my dad growing up. My mom and I both brown hair, brown eyes. So you could say, okay, well, you look more like your mom than your dad. But now, looking back, I can see that even with my mom, other than sharing the same hair and eye color, we were built nothing alike. I'm much heavier than they are. I'm just bigger all over than they are.
That is really, really interesting. Yeah. And again, if you've got no reason to suspect that you're adopted, none of this would stand out to you, right?
No, absolutely not.
Fascinating. Wow. Would you ever get the comment like, wow, where'd he get that height from?
Yeah, people would ask all the time, and my parents would always say, there's some really tall people in our family. That there was an answer for everything. And like you said, when your paradigm's a certain way, especially when it's that way from birth, you don't start questioning it all of a sudden and think, wait, maybe I'm adopted. Maybe that's why I'm taller. That's the furthest thing that ever would have entered my mind. But yeah, people asked all the time, because by the time I was 16, maybe, I was already taller and bigger than my dad by quite a bit. Not just, I hit a little growth spurt. So it was always kind of obvious. When I look at pictures now, I laugh and go, how did I not see that?
Right. This is the epitome of hindsight being 2020. But
yes,
the hindsight is also now informed by a massive secret that you didn't have access to previously. So
right.
It's not as though you were just being naive or stupid. Like, quite literally, there was an entire life's narrative that was withheld from you. And there's no way for you to have ever sort of, why would you guess? Why would a person who's living in a family think, you know what, I might be adopted, if there was no reason to venture down that thought path, right?
Yeah. The most I ever had, I'm good friends with another late discovery adoptee named Fred Nakora that I think you've probably talked to or met. He and I had very different experiences in the late discovery world. When he and I talk and he talks about differences in his life, just like me, he would never make the guess of adoption, but he would always just say, something's off here. I can't figure out what it is, but something is not right. For me, I internalized all of it and just assumed that for whatever reason, I could not get with the program. I would work hard to do good at sports, wasn't good at sports. My parents did school really well. I didn't enjoy school. So I basically internalized everything and just thought, well, if anything, I just keep screwing things up.
That is a really, really interesting point you're making, because I don't know that I've ever really thought about this, that the incongruence of how people do or do not get along might make some people think something's fishy here and they might be suspicious. But what I'm hearing you say is, I just thought I was screwing everything up.
Yep.
That is really, really fascinating. I never really sort of directly contemplated that if you didn't suspect adoption, you would just suspect you're not doing things right and you just got to work harder, be faster, be stronger, everything. That's really interesting that the internalization was what ended up happening for you. Fascinating.
Yep.
So did you know other adopted people growing up? I'm just kind of curious if you can remember anyone saying that they were adopted.
I I did, and I did not remember any of it. Oddly enough, my best friend through elementary school, and then we kind of parted ways in middle school because we moved apart. But he was my best friend as a kid, and his mom was my mom's best friend, and he and his brother were both adopted. And it wasn't until probably a couple years ago that I was talking to his mom that she reminded me that he was adopted, and suddenly I could picture the entire conversation when he told me he was adopted. But it was such, and he grew up knowing, but it was such a non-entity for two kids playing that it was like, oh, okay, you're adopted, now let's keep playing. But yeah, it's weird. I knew a few growing up, and in my adult life, now that all this has come out, I can't count the number of adoptees that I work with that I never knew they were adopted.
Mm-hmm.
Other people that I've just known in my life, and they're like, oh, I'm adopted too, and I had no idea.
Mm-hmm. It's really, really interesting. I almost wonder if people like get sick of me saying it, because I tell everybody, right? Partially because I'm a podcast host and this is what I do, is interview adopted people. And I'm always interested to share the story and the challenges of adoption with people, both who are adopted and those who are in the lay public, for lack of better words. And I always like to tell the story, my own story, and share that I do this podcast because there are so many people out there that you will walk right past, and you will be in a meeting, at a conference, you will be best friends with them for 10 years, next door neighbor, you name the relationship, and you will never have known they were adopted unless one of you says it to the other. Yep. And so this is why I do this show, because adoption can be a very lonely experience until you find one other person to connect with, let alone discovering this whole community. It's so fascinating just to think that you've been surrounded by people who shared your experience, one, but two, had your experience and you didn't even know that you were sharing the experience because you didn't yet know you were adopted. I mean, this is just wild.
Yeah. To the point that the boss that I was working for when I made my discovery is an adoptee. I had no idea, and I went into work after I had found out, sat him down and said, hey, I'm going to have to take about a week off work. I got a lot going on. Here's what happened. I laid out what had happened to him. And his first response was, I'm adopted too. Did you not know that? And I was like, I had no idea. And he'd been my boss for 6-7 years and never knew.
Is that right? That is incredible. Yeah. If it doesn't come up, you'll never know. And I mean, this is true for anything else too. Like, and I don't mean to make light of anything, but you could have been a childhood cancer survivor. And if you don't talk about it openly, it won't come up. So it's not that it's so super unique, but it is very unique in that the separation of a child from their natural family to be raised is a big freaking deal. Brad said his relationship with his parents stayed pretty much the same. He and his dad got along well. His relationship with his mom was strained. He said when high school was over, he was in the starting blocks ready to sprint out of the house to start his own life. Brad wasn't the guy to check in much. He was hyper-independent, which caused some conflicts. What would happen when you and your mom wouldn't get along? Did you blow up? Was it fierce? Or was it like silence? Or was it just that it was so consistent that it was just every day, it was just a little something where you just it was the norm?
No, it was a very one-sided fierce. My mom doesn't do well with correction or people that tell her she's done something wrong or could do something a different way. There's no such thing as really constructive criticism for her. And because of that, anytime I would bring something up that wasn't always positive, that would cause a pretty good blow up. So I learned pretty much from an early age to just head down, try to do what mom wanted. And as I got to be a teenager, because I was a little bit rebellious as a teenager, that became harder and harder.
As you look back, do you see that challenge in getting along with her as whatever your parents' challenges may have been in needing to adopt? Did you get the sense now as you reflect that she just wished she had been more like you, or that she could have had her own child or anything like that?
I am sure that she wished she could have had her own child. My dad told me that he was infertile and that's why they adopted. He had mumps when he was a kid, and I guess back then that could cause you to become infertile. But that's what he explained, why he explained that they adopted. But I really think what it was for my mom and I was I cannot think of the attachment style, but she is the person that needs constant affirmation and affection. And really, not till I figured out I was adopted and then started really, once I was out of the fog and reflecting on it. And I think I've heard you mention this on the podcast. You're married. Do you have kids?
Yes.
Okay. So can you think of a time, because I can, when your kids were infants and it didn't matter what you as the dad did to calm that child down, there was nothing you could do except hand that baby back to your wife for the baby to calm down?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Me too. So what if you take a baby and hand that to somebody that needs the constant affirmation, and the baby's not going to give that because that's not who the baby's looking for? And it's not the baby's fault. It's not the adoptive mom's fault, but she's not the person that I grew inside for 9 months that I was familiar with. So I think she felt more than likely rejected from very early on because that was her only experience with a baby. She didn't have a biological child to be like, they really cling to their mom. She just had me, who didn't cling to her because I was looking for somebody else.
Wow. That is really interesting. You were inconsolable at those times, and the one person you were looking for was not in that household.
Right. And there was nothing she could do to be better at it because she just wasn't the person. It's one of those things I always feel bad when I say, because I'm afraid people are going to think I'm knocking her. I'm not knocking her at all. She just wasn't the person I was looking for any more than when I was holding my own children. When they wanted mom, I was not the person they were looking for.
Yeah. Yeah. And that, you're right. That is not a knock on her. It's a function of the separation that an infant had from the mother, as you said, that you grew inside of. So there's literally no way that could have worked out in those moments when ultimately what you needed was the same voice that you had heard for the preceding 9 months, right?
Right. Well, and I think I was adopted in 1970, and I think still back then, now talking to my friend's mom and hearing some of the things they learned, it was a little different for them than it was for my parents, I think. But I think really the adoption, I won't even call it an industry because mine was private through a doctor, but there weren't a lot of supports for not only the relinquishing parents, but the parents that were getting the babies. That they still lived under the idea of, this is a blank slate, so we just hand you this baby and everything's going to be fine.
Yeah.
Everybody will just fall right into a routine. They didn't really tell them, hey, there's going to be some things you struggle with this child. And it doesn't mean, I think what a lot, not just my mother, but lots of people interpret when things are going badly, just like I did, you internalize that and think, well, I'm doing something wrong. Well, how can I blame them for doing the same thing when they're having struggles with a baby and nobody told them that because it's an adopted child, there will be these struggles?
Brad and his wife are high school sweethearts. They started dating when they were 17. They got married when they were 23, and they had been together for 30 years when Brad and I spoke. In 2016, Ancestry DNA was popping up on television frequently, and both of them were interested. His wife knew plenty about her ancestral background from Czechoslovakia, but Brad could never get his parents to talk much about his grandparents. When his dad flew overseas, Brad asked him to bring back artifacts from the family, like a family crest from England or something significant from their shared past. But his dad would dismiss the idea, saying nobody really cares about that stuff. But Brad was asking for it. He clearly cared. So many years into their marriage, at about 46 years old, Brad and his wife decided to do ancestry DNA tests together for Christmas. Brad just wanted to learn more about his heritage, his lineage, and physical descendancy through the world's history. He wanted the answers his father wasn't bringing home. Brad and his wife received their results at the same time, and Brad dug into his heritage with fascination. With his curiosity satisfied, Brad closed his ancestry DNA tests and only opened them one more time when he and his wife broadcasted their computer screens onto their TV screen at home for his parents and her parents to see. Brad's parents didn't say a word about his heritage. Brad didn't open his ancestry DNA results again for nearly 3 years. Neither Brad nor his wife realized there was a messenger feature on the platform until his wife received a message one day from a woman she didn't know who was trying to understand her relationship to Brad.
When my wife asked me, I told her, I was like, you know that I can name my grandparents, a couple of aunts, and a couple of cousins, and past that, I don't know anybody. So the fact that this name that I don't know is popping up means nothing to me. I have no idea who this could be. I can tell you my mom and dad were both very much, now it makes me wonder more now, but they were not big on being online. Like mom and dad didn't like having Facebook pages, social media and all that. That all made them very uncomfortable. So I told my wife, I was like, I don't think it's something I want to go ask my mom or dad because they're not going to like that information being out there. Mm-hmm. So I don't mind if you try to help this lady work through the relation. And I should back up and say, before I made my discovery, 1 year for Mother's Day, I had to work and couldn't get together with my parents. My mom apparently was very upset that we couldn't get together for Mother's Day. My dad met me at work to get the present that I was supposed to give to my mom. And he was like, I'm sorry your mom's upset. These things happen sometimes. I think part of the reason she gets so upset is I don't think we've ever told you, but your mom might be adopted. And that was the first time I'd heard that. So I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, when your grandma died, or shortly before your grandma died, when she was in a nursing home, she told your mom one day that she was adopted.
Wow.
And we don't know if your mom didn't want to pursue it and look into it. And we don't know if it was just her getting towards the end and being confused. Nobody has any clue. I still don't know to this day if biologically that was my mom's parents or not.
Wow.
So my initial thought when this woman reached out was, okay, if mom's adopted, this woman is her same age, it could easily be half sibling, cousin, somebody that's related like that.
So you're thinking that this person is related to your mom that you don't know yet is not biologically related to you.
Correct.
Mm.
So that's where my head initially goes. What's crazy is even with that, Damon, do you think I went and looked at the matches to find out who this woman was that was contacting us?
No, because you had assigned this out to your wife. You delegated that task.
But she didn't look either. We're both like, well, we don't know who she is, but whatever. The last thing we thought to do was look at the relations, because if we would have looked, it would have been really clear that something weird was going on. But instead, the woman and my wife spent about 2.5 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, going over different scenarios of how I could be related to her. And the woman was hinting around at adoption and things like that, but never flat out came and said it. And my wife wasn't catching the hints because her paradigm was just like mine. The one question we didn't have was who my parents were. So that never, when this woman mentioned adoption, that would never pop in her head. And it wasn't until we were on a date one day, we were having a lunch date, and we were sitting at a Thai food restaurant enjoying some soup. And my wife's phone dings and she picks it up and she just goes, huh. And I was like, huh, what? And she said, well, that woman's messaging me again, and she's done all the research, and she said there's no way that she's related to your mom, because that's really what we had kind of settled on, that we thought it might be. And I looked at Pam and I was like, well, I don't know what to tell you at this point. That was my only guess. I'm still too stupid to know that I should probably go look at Ancestry, so I have no answers. And then she goes, well, but there's more. And I was like, okay, what's the more? She said, well, this lady said that her sister had a baby boy in Dallas on your birthday that was given up for adoption immediately after birth, and she thinks it's you and your parents never told you were adopted.
Wow.
And we both laughed that off without a second thought, because of all the things that was still not registering anywhere in my brain as a remote possibility of my life.
Mm-hmm.
So over lunch, what we came to the conclusion of was I asked my wife, I said, hey, can you just message this lady back and ask her what hospital she thinks or that this baby was born in? Any other information she can give you, because when I get home, I'll go get my birth certificate out of the safe and we can at least get this lady on the right track. So my wife does, and the woman says she can't remember off the top of her head, but she'll think about it and do some research and see if she can get back with us and tell us. So when we got home that afternoon, my in-laws were over watching our kids because they were smaller back then. And because we've been talking about ancestry all day, my wife and her mom start talking ancestry and looking at stuff on ancestry and working on the family tree. I, of course, quietly go straight to the fire safe and get my birth certificate out because I just want to get this lady on the right track and move on with my life. And this is when things kind of started to crumble for me, because when I pulled my birth certificate out, I'd had it for 25 years probably. I had never really paid much attention to it. I used it to get my driver's license. When I got hired for my job, I had to show it for that, but I'd never really looked at it. And when I started looking at it, the first thing that was bad was in location of birth, instead of having it ask for an address or a hospital name, there were just 2 dashes in it. There was no location of birth given. My wife was also born in Dallas in 1970. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to get my wife's birth certificate out and put these 2 next to each other and see why it's different. And when I did that, things really went off the rails because the 2 documents couldn't have been more different. Mine looked like an old copy off a microfiche machine, if you remember those.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of looks more like a negative where the typing is all in white, the background is all black.
Mm-hmm.
So they looked different, and I was still immediately willing to write that off and thought my parents lost my birth certificate at some point, and this is what a 1970s copy of a birth certificate is.
Right.
No big deal. So then I started comparing, because all the boxes are numbered. You can go line by line and look at the boxes. And what I'm noticing as I go is there's just more discrepancies. It doesn't say where I was born. In the box that her dad signed, being the witness to her birth, my dad's name is just typed in the box.
What do you mean? How are they different? I'm not following.
So there's a box for the signature of a witness on a Texas birth certificate.
Oh, it's not signed by a person.
Her dad had physically signed her birth certificate as the witness. My dad's name was just typed in the witness box, and there was no signature there.
I understand. Mm-hmm.
So that was different. And the thing that really stuck out to me, but I still was writing off as a photocopy of a birth certificate, was we were both born in Dallas. My wife's birth certificate is stamped and sealed from Dallas County. My birth certificate is stamped and sealed from Travis County, which is Austin, the capital. But we were both born in Dallas.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
So the more I look at that, the more I'm like, this isn't making sense at all. So now I don't know what to do. My in-laws are still over. We had agreed that we weren't going to talk about this with anybody. So I couldn't just go in and be like, we have to talk right now. Something's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So I kept mulling it over. And the next thing I bounced to was trying to rack my brain through adulthood and childhood of any stories about my birth, because my wife and I had 3 kids at this point. My parents had been there for all 3 births. My mother had told every embarrassing story about me as a child that I never wanted told. So I was sitting there thinking, surely at some point there's some gross or some birth story here that I'm going to remember that she told people. And the more I racked my brain, the more I came up empty. And the same thing happened with my dad's a pilot. Mom back then, actually before she became a real estate agent, she was a flight attendant. So they were flying all over the place, and they loved taking pictures. So there were pictures of them flying all over the world, because my dad was in Vietnam in the late 60s. So there's pictures from everywhere. And the one thing that I still can't come up with in my head is the time that I ever saw a picture of my mom pregnant.
Ah.
So now I'm stuck with my birth certificate looks weird. I've never seen a picture of my mom pregnant, and my mom's never told a pregnancy story, which adds up to a lot of weirdness, but not enough yet to kick me over the edge to say, okay, this lady could be right.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
So I stuck my head in the living room where my wife was and said, "Hey, has that lady ever emailed you back with that place?" Because I didn't want to get into all of it with her parents. And she said, she looked on her phone. She said she can't remember where it is, but she said, and this won't make sense to anybody that's not here, but she said it was right off a street called Colorado Boulevard in Dallas, right by where they lived, and they lived at this location. So I was like, okay. So I plopped right down, got on Google Maps, and I knew where she was talking about because my grandparents, or my mom's parents, lived probably a half mile to a mile from Colorado Boulevard in Dallas. So I knew the about area. So I plopped down at the computer, pulled it up on Google Maps. The only thing she could tell us was that I was not born in a hospital. I was born in a small women's clinic somewhere off Colorado Boulevard. And she said that it was a white building with a green roof. And that threw me for a loop because I knew where that building was.
Really? Okay.
Yes. When I was growing up, there was a place called Stevens Park Hospital that was a mile and a half from my grandparents' house. And there was a doctor there named Dr. Carmichael, who was a family friend. And I'd say over half the times that we would drive out to visit my grandparents, we would stop by the Stevens Park Hospital, because I say hospital, people picture big hospitals. This is a single story
clinic,
little bitty place. It's more of a clinic, but it was still a hospital on the sign back then.
By name, yeah.
But we would stop and see Dr. Carmichael because he was an old family friend and nobody was sick. We would just hang out for 10 or 15 minutes, talk to Dr. Carmichael, and then move on to my grandparents' house.
So you were frequently visiting this dude, but
yes,
had no idea what his direct impact had been on your life. That's fascinating.
Nope.
So when she names this building and describes it, it immediately jogs a memory of, oh yeah, we stopped there all the time.
Yeah. And
wow.
I'm like, oh God, I know exactly where this is. And now it's gone from it doesn't make any sense, but I'm still holding pretty strong to my paradigm, to it doesn't make any sense. And I'm really getting scared that this woman's right. But when Pam asked her, can you give us any other details, anything else? There was nothing. So my wife's parents finally left. I sat down with my wife and, spilled it all to her. I said, here's where I'm at now. And I've gone from this is a funny story and we're going to help this lady get back on the right track to I'm starting to freak out a lot. So I run it all by her and I'm like, okay, so you've been around my mom. Has my mom ever told you a story of being pregnant with me? Because she was around you during your pregnancy with all of our kids, and we had fertility issues between our first and our second child. So my mom had been around for that. It's like, has she ever talked any time about being pregnant with me? And my wife sat there for a little while. She's like, I can't think of that ever happening. I was like, okay, me neither. What about a picture? You've seen all our photo albums. Do you ever remember seeing a picture of mom pregnant? And again, she was immediately like, no, I've never seen that. I was like, okay. So me neither. Here's our birth certificates. Here's why they're different. The place that this woman's describing is Stevens Park Hospital I used to go to all the time to visit this doctor, just to say hi. And I can't figure out what to do with all this information because I'm not sure where it's like where you are, but all the records are still sealed here in Texas. So I'm just at a loss, and I'm really not at all excited to call my parents and say, hey, did y'all adopt me and not tell me? Because that just seemed, it still seems like a super offensive question to ask somebody unless you're really solidly sure on the answer.
Yeah, right.
To look at the parents that have raised you and taken care of you your whole life and be like, hey, am I really y'all's?
And you're nearly 50 years old. Like wow. Yeah, that is a tough one to ask at that age. You're right.
Yeah. So my wife, being the smarter one of us, remembered that we had a good friend from church who had grown up her whole life knowing she was adopted. And after 9/11 had jumped through all the hoops in Texas to get her records unsealed, and eventually was able to decipher enough non-identifying information to track down her birth parents.
Wow.
So my wife's suggestion was, hey, call our friend Jan in the morning, because by now it's like 10 o'clock at night. She's like, call our friend Jan in the morning, tell her what's going on, and let her look at your birth certificate, see what she thinks. and see what direction she would give you, because she's gone through the court process. She knows some of the ins and outs of it. So that's great. So next day I get up, I go to work, I call our friend Jan, tell her what's going on. And as I'm talking to Jan, she said, well, do you have a picture of your birth certificate? I said, yep, I do. I'm going to text it to you now. So I texted her a picture of my birth certificate, and she said, well, hold on. I'm going to hang up. I'm going to go get mine, and then I'll call you back so I can look at the two of them side by side. I said, okay, no problem. Well, when Jan called back, it was a totally different Jan on the phone. It had gone from happy-go-lucky Jan to, when I answer the phone, she's like, hey, how are you doing? And I'm like, well, not good with the way you sound all of a sudden. You don't sound normal anymore. She said, well, I don't even know how to start this conversation off with you, but I'm going to send you a picture of my birth certificate. I said, okay. So she texted me a picture of her birth certificate, and my initial thought was that she accidentally texted the picture of mine back to me. Because they looked the exact same. They're both the microfiche copy looking thing. They both don't have the address of birth. They're both missing the signatures. They're both from Travis County instead of the counties that we were born in. But they looked identical, and I said, okay, so yours looks just like mine. She said, yeah, and I did some research before I called you back, and that's what altered birth certificates from the 1960s and 70s looked like in Texas.
Wow.
She said, I don't really know how to tell you this, but I think you may be adopted and are just finding out right now. And
what did you think?
I still was 100% not prepared to believe that.
Yeah.
I could not make that leap in my mind. So I asked her, talk me through what you did to get your records unsealed. Is that an option for me? Tell me what I could do to find out, because I still don't want to make this conversation with my parents. And she basically explained to me, and I've since gone through the process and know that is the case, that basically here in Texas, you can petition the courts to unseal your birth records. And you explain why you would like to know, and the judge decides if the state of Texas can go ahead and just keep keeping that a secret from you or not. Yeah. And there's no recourse if they decide not to give them to you.
It's so crazy, isn't it?
It's insane. It's the only time I've ever known where the government could keep secrets about me from me. I know the government keeps secrets from me.
I was going to say, you might be surprised.
But I didn't know that they would have secrets about me that they also kept from me. So I figured I would know all the stuff about myself. Oh, man. But now I know better. So the more we talked, the more she convinced me that the only way to really find out was to ask my parents.
Brad decided he needed a plan to get some answers. Since he was closer to his dad than his mom, and she was more the worrying type of the two parents, Brad decided to approach his dad first. The man was 78 at the time, had a cell phone, but didn't carry it everywhere like most of us do today. When he got home, he would usually turn the phone off, throw it in his desk drawer, and not pay any attention to it until the next time he needed to turn it back on. Brad figured he would time his call to his dad's cell phone with the evening, the time when he suspected the phone was off and he could leave a message. Keep in mind, Brad wasn't the kind of guy who was frequently in touch, checking in with his parents, so it wasn't unheard of for him to call out of the blue and suggest they get together to catch up. So Brad simply called thinking he was going to offer to get lunch or a beer or something sometime soon.
And Damon, it was the best plan in the world till he answered the phone.
Oh no, Brad. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
I call the cell phone, and instead of getting the voicemail, I get, hey, Brad, what's up? And I'm like, oh, come on. So mentally, I rewind and I reboot, and I go ahead and give my speech, but I follow it up with, hey, and I just want to be upfront and clear. Nothing is wrong. Nobody's sick. Nobody's broke. Nobody needs money. Pam and I aren't getting divorced. The kids are all good. I kind of tried to get through the list of all the things that would worry somebody. And I said, I've just got a couple of things that I'm thinking about, and I would love to get your opinion on them next time you're free. I said, it's not a rush. Just when you have time, let's get together, sit down. I want to ask you a few things that I see if I can get some clarification on some things I'm doing. And, like I said, hundreds of times we've had that conversation. It's ended the same way. Sure, let's get together at such and such time. This time he says, why? And I'm just like, oh, come on.
You're killing me, Dad.
We're weren't supposed to answer the phone. You certainly weren't supposed to ask why. I've just told you all the whys that aren't true. And I would tell you, it felt like we circled that drain for 10 minutes. It was probably more like 30 seconds of him saying why and me just repeating myself.
Yeah.
Nobody's sick, nothing's wrong, yada, yada, yada. Let's just get together and talk. And finally, when he came back with one more, I just don't like walking into things blind. Tell me what we're going to talk about. I said, Dad, do you understand I'm trying not to have a phone conversation with you? And my dad, being my dad, said, yeah, I do, but I still want to know what we're going to talk about. And I said, okay, well, do you remember that Pam and I did Ancestry? And he said, oh, yeah, I remember that. That was kind of neat. I said, yeah, well, and you told me Mom was adopted. And I'm still trying to play this out long enough that maybe he's going to stop and get off the phone with me.
Mm-hmm.
Like maybe he'll catch wind of what's coming and at least give us a time to get face to face, because this was not something I thought was something I ever wanted to do on the phone. So I said, you remember, you told me Mom's possibly adopted. Oh, yeah, I remember that. I said, well, this lady contacted us. And I was very specific with my words, hoping he would catch on. I said, this woman contacted us, and we thought that it might be Mom's half-sister, cousin, or something like that. And my dad said, that's fascinating. I didn't know that Ancestry could do things like that. I thought it was just the map. I didn't know they matched DNA. And he's carrying on and on and on. And finally, like, yeah, Dad, that all happens, but that's not what it is. He said, oh, okay, well, what is it then? I said, well, she says that I'm her sister's son that was given up for adoption at 2 days old, and that y'all have adopted me and never told me. And what I was really hoping for was some explosive answer. That woman's crazy. This is bullshit. She's after money. Pick whatever. Just some definitive stay away from this woman. And instead, all I got was, huh, and then dead silence.
Wow.
Which I don't think I've said yet, and it'll matter here in a little bit. But at this point, I had been a cop for 25 years. So I was used to paying attention to the way people responded to me, expecting certain responses, and understanding when I don't get those responses that it doesn't necessarily mean somebody's lying, but it means that something's not quite right with the story. So the huh and nothing else was not at all the correct answer for that.
Mm-hmm.
And we sat on the phone for probably 30 seconds. It turns out my mom was cooking dinner. She needed one ingredient from the store, and I managed to call when he grabbed his phone in case she needed something else and drove to the store.
Oh, wow.
So
she
what I
happened
could hear,
to not be home. He was by himself, and he could sort of process this alone. Wow.
Yeah. So what I heard was his fingers drumming on the steering wheel of his car because he had pulled over by now.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just sitting in this awkward silence. And I finally said, Dad, I'm not trying to make anything harder on you. And I think you probably know this already. But I know by what you said, how you responded, I know the answer already. But you're going to have to say it to me out loud, because until I hear you say the words, I'm not going to be able to 100% believe what I'm hearing. And he took a deep breath and gave me a little short sigh and said, well, Bradley, you're adopted, and we've been trying to figure out how to tell you.
Mm-hmm. How did that hit?
Oh, I'm not a big amusement park ride person, but it reminded me of that thing that you ride where it spins in a circle and it presses your back up against the wall and the floor drops out.
Mm-hmm.
The floor just dropped out. I'm sitting at work in my office staring at the wall going, what do I do now? I don't even, I don't even know where to begin from this at this point. And my dad did what I'll say is the things that we all, or most people that get these DNA discoveries, hate hearing, but he was doing the best he could with what he had at the time. Mm-hmm. So, he told me, we still love you. This changes nothing. In my head, I'm thinking, y'all still love me, and this may change nothing for you, but literally everything just changed for me because everything is suddenly different. Mm. And we talked for just a couple more minutes about, everything was going to be okay. And he said, well, I guess I need to go tell your mom that you know. I said, yeah, I guess that's your next step. And he said, well, you're working today, you're working tomorrow. When can we get together? And I said, well, let's get together Monday. I'll be off Sunday. I think I need a full day just by myself to let all this sink in. But then we can get together Monday and talk.
Was he as matter of fact as you just expressed it. You've told this story so many
Yeah.
times, so you've said it
He,
in a way that was kind of flippant. Was he as a matter of fact about it as you just were?
yes, he's very dry. He's very matter of fact. I think some of it is he's just dry and matter of fact.
Mm-hmm.
I think the other part is, even though he's known I was adopted my whole life, he's in the same shock situation I am because he never expected me to find out.
Right.
So I really write off any lack of emotion from him. A, that just wasn't his thing, but B, he was in the same shocking situation I was, just on the other side of it.
Yeah, true. But it also, I couldn't help thinking to myself that his words were, "We've been trying to figure out how to tell you." And and it sounded, the way that you expressed it sounded like he was also thinking to himself, whether he could admit it or not, well, that's over. Like, glad I didn't have to do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I don't know if that was there because, I mean, to this day, and my dad's since passed since I found all this out,
Mm-hmm.
and we never got to talk about this. I don't believe that for a second. I don't think they were ever telling me.
Oh, really?
I really don't. I mean,
why?
Because my wife and I had been through fertility issues. She had like 4 miscarriages. I had cancer when I was 38 and still vividly remember my mother standing in the pre-op room looking at my wife and I saying, "This is just so weird. Cancer doesn't run in our family."
Really?
So there were multiple opportunities looking back where I could see that, probably in the pre-op room wasn't the place to be like, "Oh, by the way, funny story." But I'd had like 5 or 6 weeks waiting for surgery for cancer. So there was plenty of time to sit down and say, "We need to talk to you about medical history stuff that apparently matters more than we understood."
That's what I was thinking, right? That somewhere along the course from diagnosis to treatment, there would have been multiple opportunities to reveal medical history, and that didn't happen. Of all the times that it would have been important to do so, that was among them. Your fertility was also among them too. Like, there's just multiple times when it should have come up. You're right.
With the infertility part, to me, in my head, it segues perfectly into, well, Brad, something we've never told you and we regret not telling you is we had fertility issues and we actually adopted you. So maybe adoption is something y'all should, just even if it was just as a suggestion.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that all of those times came and went and they never said a word leads me to believe that there was no interest in telling me.
Even up until that time, Brad and his wife had been through a lot together, and she was his safe space. So he knew if he called her in that moment, he could not complete his duties at work. He would be bawling over his late discovery that he is an adoptee. Brad texted his wife instead to prevent derailing his workday. He said he couldn't call her because he knew he would get too upset, but if she wanted to contact the lady whose DNA matched his and tell her that he is the man she had been looking for, that was fine with him. Brad also said to let her know that while he's not mad at her, he was in no place to speak with her given everything that he had to process. Brad also told his wife get any information she could from the woman, knowing that as his protector, his wife would feed him the information appropriately and filter it to him in a meaningful way. He figured he would take the information piecemeal and process things as they came. That approach only lasted about 12 hours before Brad wanted to know everything the woman had shared. His wife, protecting her husband, asked him if he was sure he wanted to hear the whole thing. Brad insisted he was ready.
My wife's telling me, "I don't think you're ready to hear all of this at once." And I'm like, no, I want to know everything right now. I'm ready. And she's like, "If you want to, I'm just going to let you read the text, but I really don't think this is the route you want to go." So instead of really letting it soak in for my first day, what I did was I read this long text message about how she was my mom's sister. And while she can't prove it, she believes she knows who my birth father is because my birth father is her ex-husband, who is now in prison and has been in prison for back then 48 years.
Oh my gosh. So this text message reveals to you that your birth mother and this woman's ex-husband, her own sister, had been together, which is how you were conceived. And
Correct.
this guy is not a free man. He's in prison.
And my birth mother's been dead for 19 years.
Oh my gosh. You took all that in one text? Oh,
All in one. Like I said, I didn't do it the right way.
Brad, this is
Couldn't listen
crazy.
to my wife.
Yeah, but this is the rough part of this, right?
Oh, yeah.
Is you've been like, it's almost like somebody cracked your chest open. Like this is a life-altering event, and it's impossible, I think, for someone to continue to have information that you don't have, and for you to show restraint in a super heightened sense moment of this revelation. I mean, I can't even conceive of how one would say, you know what, honey, you may be right. Let me go chill, and I'll let you feed this. Like, there's just no way to do that. Of course, you're going to want to know everything.
Yeah.
Oh man,
I really wish there would have. Yeah. So I got all of those at once.
Mm-hmm.
And then I pretty much spent the rest of the day in a stupor, just sitting there staring at the wall. And really, it's the title of your podcast. I kept just wondering, who am I? I mean, for having a late discovery adoption, or even people that do the DNA test and find out dad's not dad, all of those different things. It's very true when people tell you nothing's changed, because I woke up the day after I found out I had the same wife, the same kids, the same house, the same job. Everything was the same. At the same time, everything was 100% different than it had been the day before.
Mm-hmm.
So I spent the entire day trying to reconcile, who exactly am I? Who's this guy in the mirror that I keep passing that apparently I didn't know?
Jeez. Unreal.
All of my people are still here. My wife's still here. My kids are still here, but I don't have a clue who I am anymore.
Yeah,
I've been a cop for 25 years, and I have a father that's been in prison for 48 years.
Wow.
Make that make sense to me.
Oh, man. Yeah, that's really interesting. And it's funny. I'm doing some writing right now, and some of it's about the adoption experience. And one of the things that I've been talking about is the notion that you can have seemingly opposing positions, feelings, situations at the same time in adoption. It's not either or, it's not binary, it's both and. And what you're saying is exactly exemplary of that very thing, that nothing has changed and everything has changed. This is wild. Wow. So what was your conversation like on Monday?
It's something I'm writing as well, and I actually just wrote about it yesterday, because it's something that still, I won't say haunts me, but it leaves me scratching my head. But then when I read books about adoptees, I'm like, I don't need to scratch my head. I did the most adoptee thing I could. I went to my parents' house. I told them that it was completely okay that they had concealed this from me my whole life. Turned out that it was a closed adoption. So I, at this point, actually knew more about my biological family than they did. So I told them about my biological family. I told them that everything was great. And then I left, and nothing was great. I was a train wreck. But my job for my life had been to tell them everything was